What's going on, Soul Tribe? And welcome to Alchemist Astrology. Justin here, and are you ready to get into those lunar shenanigans? Because you know what? This is an interesting week. Just like how it's been the last couple, it's like a never leaning too much on extreme on either end. There's at least we're kind of taking the challenges with the ease there. There is one particular pocket though around when the moon's in Gemini that's looking a bit more tense just because it's having such hard aspects with the malefics. Venus is there to kind of smooth out some things, so that's at least there kind of help give it a little bit of cushion there. But yeah, very interesting week that we're going to be navigating through here. The moon's going to be getting full there. Let me see if I can still see the moon out. Hold on. Yep, moon shining bright, and get out there and see that moon. I've always loved seeing it. It actually was out really early, like right around probably around 2. I was able to see the moon 2, 3 o'clock. I mean, the sun's setting at 4 here now, so it's like which that's wild, but yeah, it's always neat to see that moon, but. Before we get all that, if you're new here, again, my name is Justin, and one of the things that I do on this channel is talk about the lunar shenanigans, which goes over the astrology of the moon, what sign it's in, what phase it's in, when it happens to go void of course, and just to get a feel of the energies each week as the winds of change happen. The moon is very closely associated with the people, and just to get a feel of what's going on in the day-to-day kind of activities, and again, the fluctuations and changes. Very powerful when you're watching and working with the moon. It can really kind of help ground you in the experience. It really kind of help you be present, in all of that. But yeah, before we get into a deep dive on the week, one thing I wanted to mention that if you want to support the work that I'm doing further, down in the description box, there is a link for my Patreon page, and I have 2 tiers on there. One of them gives access to the Lucky Day podcast, and that just talks about the most auspicious dates for each month for whatever election that you're wanting to initiate during that time. And the second one will give you access to that, plus a personalized transit report from me. The closest thing to get a personal reading. So that's something that you want to look more into. Again, that's down in the description box below. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing here. Look at that moon. But I will be covering the week of December 2nd through the 8th, 2025. And let's go ahead and jump into. Well, we know let's take it easy at first, because the moon, on the 2nd of December. The moon is in its exaltation of Taurus, so the moon's feeling good in Taurus, feeling grounded. I think that moon in Taurus energy is a great one because with the moon being, for example, closely associated with the body, I think that's a great time to just tune into oneself. Again, slow down a little bit in Taurus and just how am I feeling? Just how maybe have you been sleeping? Have you been eating? Have you been kind of fueling the body? How have you been moving it? All those kind of good things, kind of just kind of bodily check-ins. But if it's depending, because it's getting a little chilly out depending on where you're at, maybe even just getting some fresh air, getting outside, even appreciating the changes. And but here, we're getting into the, closer to the winter time. Trees are a little more barren now, but there's even some interest. You can even find the beauty in that, the cycle of change, or that things are going to be coming back alive here soon. It's in that transition process right now. But I think that, and I have this set for, if you're watching the video here, I have it set towards the end of the day on the 2nd here, and the moon's at about 18 degrees and 1 minute of Taurus. The ruler of the moon, Venus could be in better shape. It's overcoming Saturn, but it's still in a sign-based square with Saturn, and that's going to be applying over the month. And it's co-present with Mars, and the Sun, Venus, and Mars are in this sort of strange conjunction dance for a while, this little parade. And Venus is under the beams of the Sun right now. So Venus could be a bit, Venus is seeing better days. But overall, the moon is doing pretty well in Taurus there. And the nice thing, too, when we're talking about these aspects, something to think about, especially, I work by a whole sign. And, a lot of the times when you think about the sort of the Hellenistic astrologers, they were working with sign-based things. So as soon as the sign, the moon enters into a new sign, those aspects are active. That's those energies, the applying aspect, the things that are getting ready to happen, when we're working with that, not just the exact date. So this can be, whenever the moon is changing signs, we get a feel for it. And the moon's not having, it's again, a kind of a mixed bag. The moon is going to be forming, conversations conversation with all these planets at the end of the water signs here. Going to be opposing Mercury first, and then we'll have the sextile with Jupiter, which is nice. And it's got this other, overcoming sextile with Saturn, which is, if we're gonna have an aspect with a malefic, rather be an easy one than like rather one of the hard aspects. So, but there's still some of those maybe Saturnian themes that are kind of brewing up in there. So that's kind of Tuesday, just getting a feel for what's getting ready to reach its kind of like most peak on Wednesday, because on the third of December, the moon's still waxing, and before it enters into Gemini, the moon is, like I said, is going to form an opposition with Mercury. Now, oppositions are when the celestial bodies are 180 degrees apart or in opposing signs for one another, and when they can create this sense of adversity. Oppositions are the hardest aspect. They're Saturnian in nature, and with it being opposed to the moon, there could be this. Again, kind of, I'm about to pull in all these aspects here to kind of paint a kind of a richer story, because it could be with that moon sextile to Jupiter. That's when the celestial bodies are 60 degrees apart from one another. It's like the trine, but it's just a little bit weaker. It requires a bit more initiative, but still one of the easy aspects. And it could be where, the moon sextiling Jupiter is trying to find that sense of goodness, that's wanting to create some ease, but that sextile with Saturn, there's still work that's being involved. So let's say, Jupiter can be deal with like inheritances. That's something that you have to build up, that legacy, to leave some things behind. And that Mercury, opposing Mercury, may not, it can be hard to keep that mindset sometimes, when you're thinking about the long term versus what's happening right now and how you can budget for that. Or another thing, just thinking about, again, pulling back into the body. If you're wanting to get the body to a certain level of health, that's going to be, which is going to be good, Jupiter is going to, again, require that effort. It's not going to be something that's just going to be that instant. You'll see some results, but, getting it to that condition, and then it's not just getting it there, it's maintaining it. The work of Saturn is never quite done. You reach that peak even when you start something, but then let's say like you go to have, you wanted to have a child, and okay, that's great. The child, that doesn't just stop. You got to nurture those things and keep those things going. And so the moon opposing Mercury, there could just be some tensions, maybe in like conversations, maybe people are just trying to balance a lot right now, trying to, feeling the restriction again from Saturn, but trying to keep that faith, that trust that things are going to improve as well. So again, kind of a bit of a mixed bag, as the moon is kind of ending its time in Taurus. But I think ultimately, again, with a little initiative there, we can get to that abundance, that those gifts, that Jupiter's, that relief from bondage, that Jupiter's wanting to give. So there's something to kind of think about there. And then then to give you a little bit more to think about, afterwards, the moon is going to enter into Gemini, and that's going to happen at about 6:48 p.m. Pacific time. Now, this is where, and if you're watching the chart, I have that chart up here with the moon in Gemini. Now, again, this is where we get a lay of the land, because this is that point where now the moon entering Gemini, it's got this by sign, it's got Saturn that's overcoming it, and again, by a hard aspect in a square. So that's not the greatest. It's also opposing Mars there, but those are going to be happening later. We'll get to that full moon, and then we have an opposition with Venus as well. So the moon's pretty busy while it's in Gemini. So that's just one to kind of get a feel of over these next couple of days, how that's looking. It's like there is that Venus there, but there's still tensions that we're really kind of working through there. Another thing too, if you have a lot of mutable placements, that's going to be it could be Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, then this moon may be working more personally with you. And I think the moon too can be a good indicator, because it does the same aspects every month, with depending on where the planets are, obviously. But the moon gives you a very quick, this can be quick, but it can give you an idea of how these longer term transits can play out there. When you see like, oh, the sun's been in this square with Saturn and Mars for a minute, or Venus has been with that for a while, as opposed to the moon's just going to kind of pass through it real quick. But That's just another thing to consider. But also, too, when we think about Gemini, Gemini is the house of Mercury. It's going to be, Gemini is the mutable air and is one of the diurnal signs. And so there's this active mental energy. There's a strong intelligence with Gemini. So I find that Gemini periods can be great for journaling, could be an example, just a great example of just helping the mind, getting the thoughts out of the body. I think that sometimes it can a lot. There's so much information now, especially with access to like the internet and everything else, that we're taking in a lot. But you need to take that time to empty that mind. Do like a little mental dump. I journal all the time, and it's nice. It doesn't have to make sense. It just could just be whatever just coming up on your mind at that time. It could really relieve some of that anxiety that I think can be experienced when Gemini periods, or when there's a lot of Gemini energy, or just Gemini energy period. But it really can be good for doing things sort of like reading, studying, and just even just general communication, talking with friends, families, coworkers, whatever that's doing. Like, just kind of bringing the air. There's a little bit of lightness, I think when the moon gets into Gemini there. So that could be just something to kind of tune in there. And I think too, the moon in ancient times was associated with the breath, and so I think that could be really useful for air energy. Especially if you find the mental gears are turning. You've got a lot of things that you're weighing on your mind right now. Just take a moment, ground yourself. The breath can be a very nurturing, very healing thing. And that's really beneficial when we're thinking about that with the moon. So. And I just think this could be where there's just even more. You may notice just people just out and about more. Maybe there's a little bit more traffic than normal. Maybe there's a little more, whether it be car traffic, foot traffic, whatever that is. So just some things to think about there with that moon in Gemini. I think that's all I got to talk about there. So let's move on to the 4th. Let's really kind of get more into these aspects here. Because then on the 4th, before the moon has that, before we get to the full moon, like I said, the moon is going to form an opposition with Venus. Now, the nice thing with this one is that even though it's that hard aspect like it was with Mercury, this is with Venus, one of the benefics. So ultimately there's some good that's trying to come in from this, but this could be where I'm going to kind of tie the sun opposing the moon to, or excuse me, the moon and sun opposition to, because that's going to happen at about 3:14 p.m. Pacific time, and I got that chart up here at 13 degrees and 3 minutes of Gemini and Sagittarius for those two. But the full moon is that where the moon is full at its maximum here. We're halfway through the lunar cycle, and it's been a busy one. It's been a very busy one since we kind of started on here, but. This could be seeing things. I always think of the full moon as like with the moon being like the body, the sun's almost like that kind of higher light of the mind. It can be that sort of maybe the mind and the body feeling at odds, or even like being able to get that sense of perspective, really kind of see things clearly. When the moon is lit up like that, we get like that light during the day like normal, but then we also get this fullness of light that we don't always get when the moon is, until the moon gets that full. So I think that could be a very clarifying time, maybe seeing where, with it being opposed to now kind of tying in that Venus, maybe seeing where we could be more dedicated to bringing some peace or some balance into our lives. Maybe there's been, again, a lot of stress that's been going on. So maybe this could be trying to make a little more time for some friends, or maybe even if it's not like a hangout, maybe it's just even like a call, or maybe even just like a text, just like a, hey, how are we doing? Because Venus wants to bring people together, when we think about that Venusian energy. And, this could be even too, just kind of looking at where maybe things have gotten into disarray. Venus is a very clean energy. It's about that cleanliness, purity when it comes to Venus. So even doing some stuff, cleaning some things around the house, whatever that's looking like, maybe buying something to accentuate the place. Maybe it's been looking a little dark or a little bit, whatever that is, something to, something colorful or something bright to kind of liven up the mood, maybe bringing in some plants or something like that, for example. But it's very interesting with the moon opposing the benefics, but it is ultimately leading to that sense of balance. And it could even be too seen whether if there's been any sort of like dissonance in, let's say, in any sort of like relationship, or maybe even with some sort of like maybe there's been a lot of stress eating, maybe there's been some other like maybe not so healthy aspects that maybe we've been getting into, and this could be a time to just like make some adjustments, again with that opposition to the with both of these oppositions that are happening. But let's get into the little bit of the harder ones, because then we have the on the 5th of December, before the moon enters into Cancer, because now we're in the waning cycle, the moon is going to form that opposition with Mars. Now, Mars is, Mars, again, one of the malefics. This is a very challenging energy for the moon to be in. This could be where Mars can signify like anger, it can be frustration, it can be this, just wrongdoings. I think that I remember reading somewhere, I think it was one of Chris Brennan's, he has a translation of on the nature of the stars from Valens, and I think I remember reading somewhere it was like those who are experts in wrongdoing or something like that. And so that's very martial. It can be, the moon was once, was associated with just like again, like with fortune and like our possessions. And this could be where maybe the winds of fortune are changed a little bit. Maybe this could be where we get a surprise expenditure, for something, or like maybe like some sort of like, I'm thinking like, let's say if the body gets injured, for example, this is silly. Just the other day, from when I'm recording this, I ended up taking a pretty hard trip and ended up injuring the body. And that really kind of limited a lot of the things that I could do. I was like, oh, I planned on working out. That's not happening. Even just like things I just never thought about or didn't have to think about. Just like, oh, going uphill or downhill was like hard. And like even certain positions that I can move in. And it's just like, that could be that martial energy where something is damaging. Something is a hindrance, is a block, and it's something unexpected with Mars. It can be just kind of out of the blue. And then with that moon squaring Saturn, then the consequences of that, kind of come in there, the hindrances, the delays, the whatever that is. The malefics tend to take away things. They tend to be, again, real kind of tough aspects there. And so I think with it still, even though this is all happening, the moon, again, still has that energy with Venus. So if there's something that maybe you've been dealing with, this could be maybe asking for help, with Venus, seeing whatever assistance that you can find. That could be a great way of trying to work with these sort of, with these kind of harder aspects that are building up there. But yeah, this full moon, it's kind of a mixed bag, I think, that we're kind of getting to this halfway point. Things seem to really kind of be reaching a real kind of climax here. Yeah. So of this month, as the full moons can often be. So just something to kind of tune into there. There may be just more kind of general agitation in the just kind of in the collective sphere, whatever that might look like. So just keep that in mind. And then later, at about 5:54 p.m., the moon is going to move into its home sign of Cancer. And I have that on the chart here. And when you get the moon in Cancer, now this is kind of nice because then we're moving out of that energy of Mars. We're not being witnessed by Mars right now, so that's great. Moon's co-present with Jupiter, who's exalted in its in the moon sign of Cancer, so that's really nice. It's got this trine that's going to be happening with Mercury and a trine that's going to be happening with Saturn. So a little bit easier than what we just kind of got out of when the moon enters there. So that's at least kind of something to look forward to. It's like the moon's like trying to run home, but it's got this crazy obstacles right before it gets there that we're going to have to dodge. But another thing too, if you have now we shift to the cardinal placements. If you got a lot of placements in like Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, or Aries, that would maybe something that'd be more this period of time, maybe a little bit more active for you. But also, too, when you think about just the nature of Cancer, this is the domicile of the moon, the moon's home. And Cancer is the cardinal water sign in one of the nocturnal signs, so receptive in nature. And this is really kind of, again, the water's energy is really about the things we feel. And I think when you that all really kind of channels to, we feel the things through the body, to get signals about things, whether, if something's too cold, if something too hot, something feels off physically or emotionally, something is it's Cancer's really internal like that and really tuned into the fluctuations and the changes, and it's a very sensitive energy when we're thinking about Cancer, and so that could be where we're feeling a bit more receptive to, or more perceptive of other people's needs and things. That's where I think that nurturing quality of Cancer comes in from that moon, being able to sense when someone's feeling off, and to be able to sense when they're, and a lot of that comes through. The moon was associated with like the countenance, thinking about the face. You can tell a lot about how people are feeling based off their facial expressions, just a little subtleties. And I think that's something about water signs that is not really talked about a lot. It's just that how observant they are. I think a water sign will just kind of watch you and just kind of just like, what's this feeling? Let me see, like, oh, they said that weird. What's that about? Sometimes it can be projection. I think that is something to tune into. You can be so subjective and very internal. I think it's good to just kind of check in that. But the moon right now in Cancer is a great time to withdraw in, do some things that just get you feeling regulated again. I think that's a whole thing with Cancer, is trying to figure out, having someone as a ruler like the moon, dealing with those, finding that constant state in the inconsistency. And I shouldn't even say it like that, like trying to stay grounded in the fluctuations of the moon with all the changing things, and to be able to ride that wave, to be able to be in that cycle. So, and that takes a lot, because it's always, again, the moon's the fastest star in the sky, so it's like, that's something that can be challenging sometimes. But I think when Cancer gets in that flow, magic happens, and I think that's where that intuition comes from, that just all that good stuff, that the more positive qualities of Cancer. But this can be too, just like, Cancer, again, I have a Cancer, my sun in Cancer. Cancer energy could just be just sort of general moodiness, but I think it is just, and it's honoring that moodiness. It's just like, hey, you know what? Yeah, I might be feeling this type of way. I remember when the moon was in Aquarius, I was not about it. I was not about it. Moons, that's always not always, but that is often a time where there's just all these hard aspects that are happening in my chart whenever it's in the fixed energy. And so that was like meh. But then when the moon moved into Pisces, it still was like, still kind of like not so, it wasn't too bad, but it was definitely an improvement from when the moon was in Aquarius. So really kind of neat when you tune into those things there. But that's the Cancer energy, moon being at home, and that's pretty much the energy we're really kind of steeping into on Saturday. When we get to the 6th there, I got a moon set at the end of the day on the 6th. The moon's at about 18 degrees and 40 minutes of Cancer at this point. And again, this is just a time where this is more flow that's happening here. Again, with all these trines, this is really kind of easier energy that's happening. Ease to deal with kind of Saturnian things, ease, like Mercury. And this is nice too, because now the moon is having these conversations with Mercury, who's now freshly direct. Even Saturn too, they stationed about the same time. It was like Saturn was on the 27th, Mercury was on the 29th. So now the moon is kind of, again, recalibrating to these energies and getting back into this flow and back into the swing of things, as we kind of move through Saturday. And then we get to the 7th of December, and first, that moon is forming a conjunction with Big Papa, and that's always, it does that monthly conjunction, and that's nice, where the moon is, this could be, for example, especially with the moon in Cancer, I would think doing something like any sort of like investment for oneself. When you think about, oh goodness, this could be from maybe getting like just like a nice shirt, something to get you feeling good, or this could be, maybe get your hair cut, or maybe you can do something just like this kind of, how to describe that? Any sort of just like general good things, that make you feel better, and I think, of course, we're talking about in a healthy way, obviously, because I think that's, sometimes with the benefics. There could be that sense of, if it's too easy, then we don't do nothing. But, just doing those sort of nice things for oneself, I think could be a really nice Jupiter. Being around like people that raise up your spirits too, I think can be really nice. Even think about the spiritual aspect of Jupiter. That could be doing something, being in that water, doing some things that have you, that get you that sense of trust, that sense of faith, that can help you deal with, again, that moon trining Saturn, those kind of hardships that maybe kind of come up there, those sort of like hindrances, those blocks of things that we have to take care of, that we need to manage, whatever that is. And again, the moon trining Mercury, that's just like feel like the things are just flowing a bit more. It feels a little bit easier to process, things, whatever that may be. And it's, especially when we're talking about water energy, this could be a great time to, maybe do some work into maybe some deeper emotions, if that's something that you find yourself called to do. But, but just in general, I do kind of like this. The moon being in Cancer feels a little bit, definitely a lot easier than when the moon was in Gemini there. So it's something to kind of think about. But then we move into but then at towards the end of the day, at about 6:48 p.m., the moon will move into Leo. And now we're moving into the house of the sun, and I got that up here on the chart. And one thing that I actually found really interesting, like if you happen to notice, when the moon entered into Gemini, I have this down with the software I have. Puts it down to like the second that the moon enters, but the moon entered into Gemini at literally the exact same time. I thought that was just a little fascinating note there. But with the moon being in Leo, this is one to look at if you have fixed placements. Now we're looking at Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, or Scorpio or Taurus, then this energy may be working a little bit more active for you with this moon. But looking at what the moon's getting ready to form in the aspects, now it's not being viewed by Jupiter, Mercury, or Saturn anymore. Now it's just looking at all this fire that's going on here. But at least it's this harmonious aspects that are happening with this fire. It's going to form a trine with Venus, which we love that. Form a trine with the sun, which is really nice. And even a trine with Mars, it's something. It's something. It's getting the energy moving. So, and that can be very motivating, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But when you think about Leo as a sign, being that the sun finds itself at home in Leo, looking at the condition of the sun, while I'm talking about that, the sun could be in better shape too, very similar to Venus. It's got Venus there, which is helpful, but it's just got these hard aspects with Mars that is co-present with, and it's building up that square with Saturn. So sun could be in better shape. But Leo is the fixed fire sign, and then one of the diurnal signs. And this, to me, can be, when you think about the sun, that sense of will, the sense of purpose, that drive, again, that higher light of the mind. It's doing those things that fuel that light, and then how do you make that? And the more that you're fueling that light, the brighter that you get. That's why I think Leo gets a lot of that sort of regal energy. It's one where I find with Leo placements, the more that you do the things and invest in those things, it's like, it is really incredible what it can, how it can stand out like that. And so I think the moon in Leo can feel more, doing things that make you feel more energized. This could be, I think fire is a great time for getting the body moving in some type of way. It doesn't have to be anything vigorous, but just something to just get it feeling alive again. Eating, checking to see what you're eating, how you're fueling the body. Have we been getting enough rest? Do we have, whatever that may be looking like. How are we kind of tending to our things, and do the things that we have? Are they supporting us? Are they dragging us down a little bit? That could be another way of looking at that kind of moon in Leo there. But I ultimately like when the moon's in Leo overall. But just the sun could be in a bit of better shape. But then we get to the last day here, the 8th of December. And the last thing we're going to talk about is that trine with Venus. So that's a really kind of nice note to end on there as we kind of finish that up. Because the trine with Venus, like I said, the trine is when and I have that up here on the chart, it happens at about 10 degrees and 2 minutes of Leo. That's when it reaches exact there at about 11:55. But the trine is beneficial. It creates this sense of ease. It's Jupiterian in nature. And when we think about that with Venus, this could be, finding those people who get you lit up. Venus being in a fire sign, especially in Sag, is wanting to go on the adventure, wanting to find something larger than life. And so this could be, again, finding those people. I find that Leo in Sagittarius energy could be, it's a nice combination, and I think that this could lead to just really some really just kind of fun times there, for trying something new, getting out of your comfort zone in a sense, exploring different things. I think that could be kind of nice there, be around there. That gives me the Moon in Leo and like with Venus in Sag, that gets very kind of like boisterous sort of energy, like big laughs and all those sort of things, So that's what I think this Venus trine is trying to bring in here. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over there. But yeah, that's kind of where we're kind of ending out there, kind of ending on a bit of ease, and that's nice. But we will have to look forward to, and again, even like just looking a little forecasting a little bit ahead there. Even with like it forming those trines with the Sun and Mars, those are very active stars that we're thinking about. The Sun bringing that life to the mind. Both of them have that idea of motion and movement and things. So I think this could be really just kind of a great lively moon, as the moon is in Leo here. So just something to think about as we kind of navigate the week there. But I hope you found that helpful, and if you like that, definitely hit that thumbs up button and leave comments. Let me know how you've been working through this week. Like I said, last week was interesting. moving through those energies, especially around Capricorn, or not Capricorn, but especially around like when the moon was in Aquarius. That was a tough one. I have by perfections the moon is active. I have the moon in the 11th house, and Gemini's activated for me for that year. So yeah, I've been really kind of following the moon transits a lot more closely. You get a lot of really good stuff from there. And it's almost eerie, like sometimes like how those things can line up, like where you're doing certain things and then you see that lined up in the chart that's happening. So yeah, that's something that I've been, just on a personal note, been really kind of tracking those moon things a lot more closely. And yeah, it's really neat, really, really neat. But yeah, I definitely, what was it? Would the moon would have been in, because where's the moon at right now? I should probably know this right now. But let me pull up the chart really quick. Yeah, moon's in Aries right now, and this is actually not a bad one for me. But when the moon's kind of traveling, there's forming more harmonious aspects. But yeah, definitely some. It's actually about to square my sun here in a minute. But yeah. Yeah, that's basically been my week. And there's been a lot of just like, especially when Mercury, oh my gosh, when Mercury station direct, that was busy. Yeah, there you could definitely tell there was just like a lot of people out, a lot of energy moving there. So yeah, that was even kind of interesting to just kind of observe there as we kind of went through the week. But yeah, leave a comment. Let me know how this stuff is working out for you. And what else? If you want to, also down in the description box, if you want to see the monthly news, I have a tab for a playlist for Celestial News Monthly, and that talks about where the sun and the other traditional planets are going to be transiting through, what signs are going to be most affected, and how to most practically work with those energies. And then I also have these series of videos that I've been doing and I'm going to be releasing more here soon. There's just been a lot kind of going on behind the scenes that I've been working on. But I also have these series of videos talking about different celestial bodies in different signs in different places, like in the different houses. So if that's something that you want to look into, and how to just some ways to think about that as you're approaching your chart. So that's also available for you there. I have those all labeled by the signs and things, so make it easier for you to find. But I think that's all I have for you there. So until next time, stay mindful out there. You keep eyes on that moon. And I will catch you on the next one. Later.